Back to today's video. Today is Saturday, August 2nd, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the Virginia and New Jersey governor elections that are set to take place in just a few months, this coming November 4th, 2025. And as you can tell from the title of this video, I'm making some very big assumptions about the state of the race in both of these states that have toss-up / battleground governor races this coming November. And from what you can say, and what you can tell, again, like I said from the video title, is that I believe that as it stands today, and this has become something that has been more apparent over the past few months, that New Jersey's governor's race might in fact be more competitive than the one in Virginia this coming November. Now, this actually stands in practically direct contrast with every single data point that we've been working up to in the past 20 years. In the last presidential election, New Jersey voted for Kamala Harris by about 5.91%. Virginia voted for Kamala Harris by about 5.8%. While seemingly indescribable in terms of the tangible difference between Virginia's result and New Jersey's result in favor of Kamala Harris, you have to look back further to some previous elections that also show that, yes, Virginia is in a position where it is, in fact, more competitive in years past, whether it comes down to a governor election, a Senate election, a presidential election, and that stands to be at opposition with my main thesis of this video. In 2021, Glenn Youngkin, the Republican nominee for governor, defeated former Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe, who had been running for his second term in the state of Virginia. They break up terms in Virginia. So if you remember Ralph Northam, you'll see that that result there went to the Democrats in 2017, but Terry McAuliffe actually was the governor from 2013 to 2017. So he ran again in 2021 against Glenn Youngkin, and Glenn Youngkin won. Whereas in New Jersey, we saw Jack Ciattarelli, who's now the three-time candidate running for governor again in 2025, the two-time nominee for governor on the Republican side, came within about 3 points of winning this governorship. And looking at different elections again in the past, even in 2017, the last time that Democrats won the governorship in Virginia, Northam won with about an 8-point margin of victory across the state. Whereas in the state of New Jersey, we saw Phil Murphy win by about 13 points against the incumbent lieutenant governor. And I say all of this to point out that in 2025, yes, this stands in opposition with what I have understood to be the data points leading up to this race. But I am adamant in what I say, and I want you to hear me out on this point. The last presidential election, I think, was a wake-up sign for both sides of the aisle, especially as it pertains to New Jersey, and not as much about Virginia. While Virginia and New Jersey voted by near identical margins in favor of Kamala Harris, the swing from the last presidential election was much more apparent in Jersey, especially on the sides that border New York City. You can actually take a look at this visualized. The website that I use, map.jacksonjude.com, you can find it in the description box down below, does compare elections between each point. 2020 versus 2024, Virginia shifted by about 4.5 points in favor of Trump, but New Jersey by a whopping double-digit swing of 10 points on the dot in favor of the GOP. In comparison to 2016, the numbers actually got a bit bluer for Kamala Harris in Virginia, but New Jersey shifted about 8 points to the right. Kamala Harris, in essence, did about 8 points worse than Hillary Clinton in New Jersey, and about 10 points worse than Biden. Whereas in Virginia, Harris outperformed Clinton, despite Clinton having her running mate being the senator of the state of Virginia at the time, compared to Biden, who ran with Harris by about a 4-point margin in favor of Trump, swinging from one election to the other. And so looking at the general trend line around New Jersey, it is Virginia that historically has been more competitive, but Virginia is moving in a direction in this cycle that seems awfully in favor of the Democratic candidate for governor, Abigail Spanberger. The 2025 race in Virginia has been largely defined by the actions surrounding Washington, D.C., and what Donald Trump and his second administration has done in terms of its tangible, direct impact on the state that borders the southern part of the Washington district. In the 2025 race, we have seen way more advertisements focused around Donald Trump in Virginia than we have in New Jersey. You can track that in terms of ad mentions by political party. When you're looking at the Virginia governor's race too, a big reason why it's so lopsided in favor of the Democratic Party are the lack of strong candidates on the Republican side. Winsome Sears, who currently serves as the lieutenant governor of Virginia, was carried across the finish line by Governor Glenn Youngkin in 2021. But now in 2025, she's left to fend on her own and doesn't even have the endorsement of Donald Trump on the national stage. Donald Trump very famously tries to avoid endorsing candidates who his political party has told him, not necessarily in the primary, but in the general election, that they will not win. He likes to have a winning streak, and Virginia might not be part of it. Abigail Spanberger, on the other side, is a former U.S. rep, had done well in competitive districts before, and is very well liked and respected across the state. Winsome Sears, not so much. She faces tremendous amount of scandals and also faces the opposition from the voters in Virginia that voted for Glenn Youngkin but largely disapprove with the way that Donald Trump is handling his oath of office. When you take a look at the national approval around Donald Trump, one would contend that if on the national stage he's down about 9 points across the board in a state he lost by 6, he should be down by about 14, 15 points. Well, that's exactly what we're seeing in data point after data point. So a combination of a bad Republican nominee with a strong Democratic nominee and a strong Democratic year with an unpopular Republican president, combined with the fact that the polling data indicates Abigail Spanberger has a near insurmountable lead in this state, I would argue Virginia is probably going to be at least a likely state for the Democratic Party. Now, New Jersey, I'm not as thoroughly convinced. Mikey Sherrill is a strong Democrat, but Jack Ciattarelli is not a weak Republican. He is the candidate that almost took on and defeated a Democratic incumbent in 2021 when no one was paying attention to this race. And taking a look at the data points in here in comparison to that in Virginia, you'll find that while there are some lean D characterizations, in the state of New Jersey, the average here is worse off for Democrats than the average in the Virginia governor's race. Not to mention, when you take a look at some of those data points, while Mikey Sherrill takes the advantage, it's often, in the most recent 3 numbers, an 8-point margin, a 5-point margin, and a 7-point margin, which on average is lower than that of the advantage of Abigail Spanberger in the state. Not to mention the general trend lines of what we've seen in New Jersey have been more in favor of the Republican Party, and not just on the presidential level. I think the 2021 governor's race should have been a wake-up call to Democrats across New Jersey that by the next presidential election, they were going to be seeing some massive reversions in terms of support for the Democratic Party. Because what you saw in the 2021 race, was a huge change from the 2017 race, where you saw a lot of South Jersey go from being very solid for the Democratic Party to nearly entirely Republican. And parts around northern New Jersey, that shifted. You can take a look at some of these bigger counties, Kamala Harris outpacing the incumbent Democratic governor at the time. I mean, literally no one was looking at this race. Comparing it to 2020, comparing it to 2021, massive differences. So looking at this race too, what exactly made New Jersey more competitive? Well, a lot of it actually has to do with its neighboring New York City. When you look at the presidential election results in Jersey, you'll find that it is New York City's area and the outskirts that surround the state of New York that shifted so heavily in favor of Trump, not the areas that surrounded Philadelphia. Now, a lot of Democrats have chalked this up to be around the media market. If Kamala Harris is spending heavy in Philadelphia, if you're in Camden County, you're going to have that county vote in favor less of Trump in comparison to the last election than a county that received very little, press, very little media buys, like Bergen County and Passaic County and not Staten Island, I don't know why I said that, and Union County, right? These areas, though, 1,000%, that were previously pretty locked in for the Democratic Party, or at least more so. Yes, still voted for Harris, about 75% of the vote, but 85 to 90% depending on the election. And so when you see that, yes, I think the media argument makes sense to some degree. But it doesn't mean, too, that these voters won't be voting Republican. Again, I mean, the damage was done there. The investment in New Jersey didn't happen. Donald Trump invested in New Jersey. He did rallies in New Jersey as well as in New York City. And a lot of people said, and arguably, too, obviously did not pay off to the degree that it should have. New Jersey did not go to Donald Trump, and the investments in the state probably would have benefited him elsewhere had he spent it there. But in future elections like this one, I have no doubt Democrats will win both, but I do think it'll be more competitive because of things like that. But taking away the investments of the campaign, I want us to also have a very real conversation around New York City and why Democrats in New York might be less averse to electing Democrats because of it. When you think about the region that borders Philadelphia, a lot of these talking points that Donald Trump repeated across the campaign trail about Democratic city governance doesn't impact the voters in southern Jersey as much as that rhetoric would around New York City. New York City arguably does not have a great reputation. Under Eric Adams, it has become a city, might as well be a state, 8.2 million people, has become a city that has become less and less popular, and one that has been more associated with high cost of living and high crime. fundamentally at odds with the way that Philadelphia is perceived. And I know it seems like a little bit, but I want us to keep walking through this. Because looking at the way that a lot of voters do perceive New York City, a lot of people blame the Democratic Party for this optical problem in the city. Not to mention that a lot of New York City residents, or not residents, workers, actually live in New Jersey and commute from these areas that shifted heavily in favor of the Republican Party. And so thinking about 2025, especially on an election that is decided, strictly speaking, within the state boundaries, voters are more inclined to choose a Republican if they disagree with Republican ideology on the presidential level, but want to see it on a state and local level. They wouldn't do it for Senate. They wouldn't do it for House. They wouldn't do it for president, but they would do it in a governor's race. Now, Democrats obviously lucked out with Mikey Sherrill as the Democratic nominee. They counteracted a lot of the complaints that they had, that they are seeing. Mikey Sherrill is more middle of the road and does win over a lot of Trump voters. No questions about it. But she's not going to win by the margins that Biden did in 2020 because the sentiments against the Democratic Party have been baked into a degree that makes New Jersey less likely to vote for the Democratic Party to the degree that it had in the past. Whereas Virginia, which had a fluke in 2021 and did narrow in 2024, could easily revert back to being a pretty solid state for the Democratic Party, especially given how Donald Trump has maneuvered himself within this state. A state that immediately felt the DOGE cuts and the federal layoffs. A state that has immediately felt the direct impact of Donald Trump's administration in almost every single way, especially in Northern Virginia. And I think that makes a difference in terms of voting calculus and how voters use Donald Trump as this oppositional tool and thought process when they get to the ballot box about who they would vote for and why they would vote for them. Whereas in New Jersey, it's more of a distant memory. Obviously, Donald Trump dominates the political space, and I don't mean to say that voters aren't going to vote for Mikey Sherrill because they're unhappy with Trump, because they will. There will be voters out there that 100% do that. But I do think, for all of the reasons I have listed, that Jersey will be closer than Virginia. And that New Jersey's margin will be maybe narrowly closer, but still closer. Somewhere around a 8.9% victory for the Democratic Party. It could get better. There's still 3 months to go. It could get worse. There's still 3 months to go. There is time on both sides of the aisle to take this race and move it in one direction or the other. Because a lot of the times, these competitive races, while largely defined by the national optics and the national stage, can certainly change. Just ask Terry McAuliffe in the 2021 race. The final month really is what changed it all. You can find the data are really bad for McAuliffe after the beginning of October. He had led in every single poll from September onward and had led all throughout July and August. And then in that final 3 weeks of a blitz for Glenn Youngkin, he pulled ahead and won on Election Day. Now, I don't think that's going to happen for Winsome Sears. I don't think she's nearly as talented, and I certainly don't think that she has the lack of baggage that Youngkin had in the last race. And I think Spanberger stands to be a very strong Democratic candidate. And while Mikey Sherrill is a very strong Democratic candidate too, again, Jack Ciattarelli has ran for governor 3 times and is a tested Republican opponent. And while I do not believe either Sears or Ciattarelli will win their races in 2025, one must, in fact, be closer than the other. And my bet is that it's not Virginia, but is instead New Jersey. And so I could be wrong. I mean, this is a 3-month out prediction. I probably should have waited before I made this prediction. Maybe I'll do an updated one in 3 weeks' time. But it came to me today when I was making my Senate map, thinking about how I'm going to make my governor's map tomorrow, just understanding that dynamic at play, just understanding where we are today. Because Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger are strong candidates, definitely stellar for the Democratic Party side, and certainly face very different states and very different battles. And while I do think the Virginia Democratic Party might have gotten unlucky in 2021, arguably in a way that Democrats in New Jersey did not in 2021, I think this time around, for the first time in a very long time, Jersey will be closer than the state of Virginia, and it will be a very important race to watch. And it will be very important for looking as to how it votes in the future. Because it hasn't been like this in a very long time. The last time was in 2013, and that was a fluke, largely because, Chris Christie was a very popular Republican incumbent at the time. And so thinking about 2009 even, you can look at that as a point of comparison. We get there. 2009, Jersey only went to Christie by 3.5 points. Virginia went to McDonnell by 17. You look back to 2005, Jersey's 10.4, Virginia's 5.7. 2001, I don't know if we're going to find it there either. Nope. Maybe 1997. I mean, the last time, 2013, and again, that was a fluke, largely to do with the response to Hurricane Sandy. Christie was very popular. Virginia was a fluke too. I mean, we probably shouldn't have seen Cuccinelli lose that race to McAuliffe, but that's what happened. Ken Cuccinelli ran for Virginia governor in 2013. The point is that this might be the first time it's happened in quite some time, and the trend lines are there. The question is, do they permeate? Do they continue? Do they show through in 2025? There's a chance that they don't, but I'm willing to bet that they do. And that New Jersey, at the end of the day, is a closer race than Virginia in the 2025 elections. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.